Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting over Episode 8 of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. Alright, so last we left off, the Elric brothers managed to decipher Dr. Marco's notes, and in doing so, they discovered the horrible truth that human souls are the ingredients to make the Philosopher's Stone. Additionally, in order to sort of further gain confirmation about this, they've decided to enter the fifth laboratory, an abandoned research facility that might have further knowledge regarding the Philosopher's Stone, but in the process, they've sort of stumbled into the guards of the fifth laboratory. So interestingly, this first guard here that Alphonse has encountered is very different from the soldier that was standing out front. And even more interesting is that he goes by the number 66, rather than by a name. So that alone sort of indicates that the fifth laboratory is definitely not on the level. Meanwhile, on the inside, Ed has come across a transmutation circle, presumably which is used to create the Philosopher's Stone from unwilling sacrifices. So, Ed has encountered number 48, who is, I guess, the chief guard here, or so he claims. And number 48 here seems a bit, I guess, cavalier for want of a better term. It's not taking this whole guarding thing too seriously. At least, in terms of demeanor. Number 48 is deadly serious in that it's trying to skewer Edward with its sword. So it seems like Ed has made an interesting discovery from striking number 48's torso. So Ed makes a bit of an educated guess here, and he turns out to be correct. Number 48 is hollow. In a very similar fashion, in all likelihood, to the way Alphonse is. So it seems like there are some significantly sinister forces going on here if they would employ souls bound into armor as guards. Indeed, number 48 sort of lends credence to this idea by saying that he was a death row inmate before being bound to the armor. So, number 48 doesn't know much about the actual alchemy going on here, since he was really only conscripted as a guard. So, I guess 48 sort of lax attitude towards guarding makes a bit more sense when you consider that he's actually a murderer. So back in the command center, the lieutenant colonel is sort of bothering Mustang with details about his daughter. So, initially, it seems like Colonel Hughes is, I guess, rather lax and unserious, but he quickly makes things about business. It almost seems like he was sort of acting like a love-struck idiot as a form of cover. So, as fate would have it, it turns out the protection detail for the Elric brothers have discovered the subterfuge. And if they don't resolve things quickly, it will get very bad for them, as I'm sure their superiors would not appreciate them being derelict in their duty. So, as Edward keeps fighting number 48, things really start to hit the fan as the missing screw from the last episode makes its presence felt. Or lack thereof. So Edward just sort of chalks this up to Winry saying, you know, your arm's not going to be quite as durable physically, so be gentle with it. He naturally assumes it's his fault when, in reality, a sleep-deprived Winry forgot to install the screw properly. So for the lack of proper use of his right arm, Ed seems to be holding up pretty well, managing to avoid number 48's sword for the most part. Of course, it doesn't seem like number 48's wholly serious either. He's taking time to stop and talk to Ed. So indeed, number 48 sort of alludes to the fact that he knows about Alphonse. And additionally, he knows that number 66 is taking care of him and in all likelihood has killed him by now. So it turns out Edward's confidence is well-founded, and Alphonse is able to pretty easily dispatch 66. And just after punching the helmet of his armor off, Alphonse discovers that number 66 is just like him. So, number 66 tries to impress Alphonse with his history as a serial killer. You know, I like the sort of like the storybook look of this little flashback sequence where Barry the Chopper kills his victims and hangs. And interestingly enough, number 66 talks about Barry the Chopper as though he were someone else. He almost sort of makes it sound like a ghost story to me. Of course, number 66, or Barry as he was in life, he's definitely trying to scare Alphonse off. But Alphonse is not aware of his reputation as a serial killer, and neither is he really perturbed by the fact that Barry's just a suit of armor. As it would turn out, Barry is much more perturbed that Alphonse is like him than the inverse. So, interestingly enough, Barry and Alphonse are in a very similar situation despite having reached it through two very different means. Barry having been a condemned criminal who was then used in essentially a medical experiment, whereas Alphonse was put in a situation to preserve his life. So, Barry does something interesting here, and he sort of seeds the idea to Alphonse that he might not even be real, and that he's sort of like the creation of Edward's. And while he has memories, you know, they might not be real, and everything is essentially a giant conspiracy against him. So this to my mind is kind of a weak plot point, because Barry just says, you know I was alive, and it seems like a pretty weak argument, especially because the same thing could apply to Alphonse. And why he doesn't make that logical deduction, I don't know, it just seems kind of silly to me. So back with Edward, through some slight subterfuge, he manages to defeat number 48. So interestingly enough, Edward had refrained from killing number 48, he merely incapacitated him. So unfortunately for Edward, things weren't quite as they seemed, as number 48 was not merely one soul and one body, but two souls confined to one body. As it turns out, number 48 in life had a brother who shared in his crimes. And in this sort of quasi-undeath, they share the same suit of armor as a body. So unlike number 48, the other brother is much more aggressive. And considering that Edward is already pretty banged up, things aren't looking too good for him. So in a sort of a moment of inspiration, Edward manages to basically destroy the suit of armor. So while incapacitated, the brothers aren't dead, but considering they're like the upper torso and a head respectively, there's not much they can do at this point. So interestingly, the murderers want to die. And they sort of insist that Ed kills them, but he is notably reluctant to do so. I guess in part because his brother's in a similar situation. You know, if he kills them, it would be like killing his brother. But I guess from number 48's perspective, you know, they're not really people anymore, and death would be a release from the horrible circumstances they find themselves in. So back with Alphonse and Barry the Chopper. Barry's trying to convince Alphonse to almost kill himself by scratching out the blood seal. The idea being that if he dies, then he was human. Of course, that's highly counterproductive. You know, it's like dunking a suspected witch in a river, and if she drowns, she was innocent. So fortunately, number 48 seems willing to spill the beans now about the Philosopher's Stone. Unfortunately, the mysterious woman from before kills him before he can talk. So it becomes pretty clear by now that she's not only involved with the Fifth Laboratory, but she has a vested interest in the Philosopher's Stone and doesn't want his secrets getting out. So interestingly, the more androgynous figure berates the other brother while killing him, referring to Edward as an important sacrifice. So the plot continues to thicken as, while these characters seem antagonistic to the Elric brothers, they're not out to kill him. Certainly if they were intending on killing the Elric brothers, doing so would be pretty easy at this point in time. So interestingly, Edward is willing to fight with these two figures, but before he can do anything, his right arm gives out altogether. So I guess it's a sort of stroke of luck, because the two figures are willing to leave him with a paltry beating rather than beating him within an inch of his life. So back with Alphonse, he's really dwelling on what Barry told him. Especially in regards to what Ed had said prior to getting interrupted last episode about, you know, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. So unfortunately, the thoughts are really taking root in Alphonse's mind, much to the detriment of his fight with Barry. So it seems pretty clear to me that this was mainly a tactic on Barry's part to try and get in his head, and unfortunately it's working. Fortunately, the lieutenant and sergeant have shown up in time to intercede on Alphonse's behalf. Unfortunately, the Fifth Laboratory is being destroyed, presumably by those characters. And while they don't want to kill Edward, you know, it doesn't seem like they evacuated him or anything. So it seems like a rather poor move on their part if they want to keep him alive. Of course, it's not like Ed was totally helpless, but I take that back. The androgynous figure has taken him from the building. So once again, more questions are raised than are answered by the androgynous figure, as it refers to Edward as a precious resource. So clearly there are larger plans at work here than are, I guess, normally evident, but there's no real indication towards what ends these plans are being enacted. So interestingly, Kimberly, the imprisoned state alchemist from the first episode, he seems to really take delight in the destruction of the fifth laboratory, and indeed he knew it to be the fifth laboratory, which it seemed to me was sort of like a somewhat guarded secret. So it seems interesting to me that he has knowledge of it. So, interestingly, back to that call between Mustang and Hughes. Hughes makes it clear that there is serious potential for Mustang to be promoted to Central Command, but that he should also be careful because there are quite a few enemies of his given his success. So it seems like internal politics are as bad as whoever is planning is. Enemies within and enemies without. Alright, that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.